Welcome to Who Did That Voice, the show where we take an in-depth look at voiceover. And now, here's your host, Trenton Larkin.
Today on the show, we have the talented and lovely Katie Leigh. Katie has been in the business of voiceovers for over 35 plus years. She's done amazing voices from shows like Adventures in Odyssey as Connie Kendall.
Hey, what's going on? Having trouble with your shoelaces again, Eugene?
She also starred on Walt Disney's Darkwing Duck as Honker Muddlefoot.
It's your dad's cheap cologne.
Katie also played the lovable Sunny Gummy from Walt Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears.
Thank you, Gruffy.
Here's a fun fact. Katie played the piano-loving dog Rolf from the Muppet Babies.
That guy's better fear! Spider Dog is here.
Katie is also the one and only voice of Dumbo from Walt Disney's Dumbo Circus.
Lionel, where's my magic feather?
Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Today we have the illustrious Katie Leigh joining us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Katie.
I'm illustrious.
Yes, ma'am.
It's my pleasure.
Katie, would you do us the honor of just giving us a brief story of who you are?
A little brief story about me. Well, in a nutshell, everybody tells me I'm weird, but I'm nice. I grew up in Southern California. I went to college in Northern California. And when I decided to try doing voiceover, I had to move back to Southern California. That was in the 80s, and that's when it was a perfect time for me to be here. There was a lot of animation going on. There were probably about 200 people in the voiceover community. I was able to fit right in at that time and learn on the job, and I have a very, very fortunate career in that respect. I got to learn from all the old timers, and I've watched I feel like I'm the bridge. I'm the bridge generation between the original voiceover animation actors and all the new people coming up. So that's a brief description of my voiceover career, I guess. I'm a mom, and I have a 16-year-old dog. And what else do you want to know?
Well, Katie, from what I understand, growing up in California, you had a lot of friends who wanted to be actors, and you had kind of thought of going a different route, potentially as a producer, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I grew up, in Southern California, where Hollywood that's what people think of. And I knew that, I grew up like imitating people and talking to myself, but I'm pretty shy, and in a way, it depends. I've gotten a little over that since I've gotten older.
You definitely don't seem shy.
Well, I wasn't a theater person.
Okay.
I wasn't a musical person. Yeah, the theater people seemed just way too dramatic for me, and I wasn't into all that drama. But I knew I liked the industry, but I was hesitant to want to pursue anything in the industry as a career because I knew how difficult it was and how cliche it was, basically. I think I was just a little, thinking that, that's everybody's dream, right? So, because I was a really fast typist and I like machines, I thought, I think I will strive to be an executive secretary. Because at that time, believe it or not, in the 70s, I was like, that's a job that pays a lot of money. Because there were no computers or anything back then. You needed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I thought, okay, I'd like to be a secretary or a teacher. And then as I pursued, my higher education, and knowing that I still really liked the entertainment industry, I thought, well, maybe a producer would be something I would be good at. And I ended up getting a degree in broadcast communication arts from San Francisco State. Thought maybe I'd be an audio engineer, but I don't think I was quite that good. And the thought of being in a dark room for 8 to 12 hours a day was didn't sound like fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially when had other people telling me what to do and running a board. And while I was living up there, someone suggested I do voiceover. I didn't know I had an unusual voice, to tell you the truth. But right before I got in the broadcast department, I started pursuing voiceover as a means of maybe making some extra income. I really didn't think of it as anything, as a career at that time. And a woman named Lucille Bliss, who some might know as Smurfette, and some older people may even know as Crusader Rabbit's voice, lived in San Francisco, and she had a voiceover workshop. And I signed up for her. I went to go to her workshop. I got to the very last class. For some reason, she invited me. I think it may have been auditing. I don't even know if I paid her, to tell you the truth. Auditing the last class, sat in on that, and we went and made a demo. I mean, I don't recommend this to anybody, okay? But there's a big industry out there, and you got to beware. It's very expensive. You can get sucked into the voiceover vacuum of unending payments. So you want to, be really sure that it's in your budget, and you got to figure out what your goals are. So I highly recommend taking acting lessons. And I will say, while I was finding myself, I started taking improv classes. I think it was before I even did the voiceover, maybe simultaneously, but I started doing improv workshops, which I really loved and enjoyed, and I ended up working my way through my teachers, all the levels, until I said, what's the next class? And she says, oh, we're on stage. So I told you I wasn't a theater person, right? And I was like, oh, we're doing a show? Because I just love the exercises. I love the games. I liked improv. And so the last class we were doing a show. And so I found myself on stage doing improv for a few years, and that was fun. So that was my training, if you want to call it training for voiceover. But so seriously, Lucille helped me make a demo. She gave me copy. It was enough to get me a couple agents in San Francisco. I was able to land one gig that got me into the Screen Actors Guild. And so when I graduated college and everybody said, you have a great voice, you're not really going to find work here in San Francisco. It's different these days because there's a lot of video games up there and stuff, I think. And of course, it doesn't matter where you live. Like today, it doesn't matter too much. You can find voiceover work, working from home and work for people all over the world. But at that time, they said, if you want to do animation, you need to go to LA. And I was like, oh man, I just left there. But I thought, it's worth a shot. So I decided I had my card, my SAG card. So I called an agency, and as luck would have it, or Providence would have it, my agent was filling in. Oops. Sorry, that's my phone.
That's okay.
My agent was filling in for the receptionist and answered the phone, and she heard me, and she said, you sound like you're 12. And I said, okay, thanks. And I'd like to meet you. So I went down to LA and back home and had a meeting with the agency, and they wanted to sign me. And so I figured, well, I'll give it 2 years and see if I can make a living at this. And I came back to LA and worked I found a little company where I worked as an editor, receptionist, voice. It was a small company where we did everything. I answered the phones. I was a secretary. I got to do that. If they needed a voice like mine, they'd call me into the studio. I helped edit scripts, and I edited tape with a razor blade, which I actually enjoyed doing very much.
Wow.
And my gig, I got a voiceover. I started auditioning, and then I booked a part in a Mork and Mindy cartoon. And
Mork and Mindy had a cartoon?
They had a cartoon, and I thought,
wow.
Oh, wow, I was so excited. I thought I was going to work with Robin Williams, but I didn't. He wasn't there. I went in. It was at Hanna-Barbera. So it was this one part, and I thought it was going to be a recurring role, and I told my boss, and she said, well, you just can't take off and, go do this, so you can't work here anymore. So I got fired, and the part was not a recurring role. It was just a one-time thing, and there I was. But somehow, I don't know what happened. I guess I just started booking more things, and it happened. And as I was telling you before you started the interview, now I get fired every day. Basically, that's what it boils down to. You do a job, it's over, that's it. You're looking for the next one.
Looking for the next employer, yeah. With the Mork and Mindy cartoon, did Robin Williams actually voice his character in that?
Yeah, he did, and Pam Dauber, but they weren't there when I went in to do my lines, so I was really disappointed. and Jonathan Winters worked on it, too.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Did you ever at any point get a chance to work with Robin Williams?
Unfortunately, no, I did not. But when I was living in San Francisco, he was living in San Francisco too and doing improv at the same time.
Okay.
And I didn't meet him, but I'm sure I saw him, I think at the Holy City Zoo or somewhere. It seems like our paths crossed, but
just never
he wasn't as
professionally
famous at that time. but everybody knew him. Nobody wanted to really be on stage with him because he was very hard to do improv with because he just sort of took over. So that was his
I couldn't imagine
reputation.
that.
Yeah, right. It's a challenge. That was his
Yeah.
reputation at the time. So no, I didn't get to, and that I wish I could have. That would have been
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Katie, how did you end up becoming involved with Disney's animation? Was it through your first initial interaction, as far as I understand it to be, with Dumbo Circus? Was that your first Disney interaction?
I think so, because Dumbo Circus, yeah, was for the Disney Channel.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't animated.
And it was new because the Disney Channel had just kind of been established at that
Disney
point.
Channel had been on maybe a year or two because they did Pooh Corner first.
Okay.
And then, which Will Ryan, my buddy, he was in Pooh Corner. He used to do songs for Disney when he moved to California. So he was in Pooh Corner. And then Dumbo Circus, I got cast as Dumbo, and that was animatronic. So what happened when Eisner decided that Disney was going to do animation, Saturday morning animation, he called a meeting and he turned the record department into the animation department. And a guy named Jim Magon was put in charge to create a show that Eisner called the Gummy Bears because his kids had come home from camp and they had these candies, gummy bears, and he thought it would be a neat idea for a cartoon. That's the story I heard. So Magon watched cartoons. I was in a couple other shows before Disney started, and he would look to see what voice actors were on those shows and invited those people in to audition. And I guess I got caught in the net, thank God. And so I auditioned for the Gummy Bears and got that role. And that's how Gummy Bears was their first animated series that was aired. It was aired, I think, 1 or 2 seconds before the Wuzzles. They actually produced 2 shows that year, but ours was the first one to air. In a horse race, we would have won. So, yeah,
That's awesome.
And we ran a lot longer. We had many more seasons than the Wuzzles. So
yeah, the Wuzzles was cute, but yeah, it definitely did not run as long.
Well, our show had the voices of my childhood. You know, Bill Scott and June Foray and Paul Winchell and all the people I grew up listening to and watching on television. So, you know, they had the best of the best on that show. So it was pretty amazing. Lorenzo Music worked on that show. Will Ryan was on there too. But it was, we had an amazing cast. So I think if you consider the talent and the maybe even the voice recognition and the artwork. I mean, the artwork was, I think, excelled the Wuzzles. It was a classic style. So, I mean, the Gummy Bears had a lot going for it.
Yeah. Well, as far as Dumbo goes, you were the only voice of Dumbo. I believe there was a continuity director, Les Perkins, who ended up getting hired on before Dumbo got approved. And then at that point, they decided to not have Dumbo speak, but y'all had already been approved before he had made that decision. Is that correct?
Well, no, I think they hired him after Gummy Bear when they started doing animation. So
Okay.
Yeah, but I met him, and he said that one slipped by. If I had been working at that time, there would have been no Dumbo talking.
Well, thank goodness that didn't happen because Dumbo talking was I loved it. You know, as a kid watching Dumbo Circus, I remember seeing it on the Disney Channel, and it was just so amazing to see those characters like so lifelike, even though they were animatronics. You know, so
yeah, I actually
awesome.
went in to read for the cat.
Okay.
That's what I auditioned for, and then the producer said, "Hey, would you mind reading for Dumbo?" I'm like, "Sure," and that's pretty wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, would you just tell us a little bit about how you became involved with the Darkwing Duck show?
Darkwing. Well, by then I was working on a lot of shows. I had a pretty steady career. Darkwing. You don't happen to know what came first, Darkwing or My Little Pony, do you?
Yes, actually. My Little Pony did come first.
Ginny McSwain was the director on My Little Pony, and Ginny McSwain also directed Darkwing Duck. And I don't know if Ponies was the first thing she directed, but so we got to know each other really well. And I just remember her calling me into audition for Darkwing Duck, and there's this character Honker. I mean, she had me in mind, and she said, "Do that little nasally boy voice you do." I said, "Okay," and again, very fortunately, I got the gig. And that's when I did Honker Muddlefoot, who was Gosalyn's best friend.
And it's so amazing to hear you actually do the voice of Honker Muddlefoot, because you do sound so much like your other character on Adventures in Odyssey, Connie Kendall. And growing up with her, I never realized that you were so many voices from my childhood that I loved and cherished as a kid growing up.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. You don't realize it till time goes by and you look back and just see this like, it's a cartoon image of taking a sheet of paper and, reading the king's court and the guy's gonna read and the paper rolls across the floor and you go, wow, we did all that.
Absolutely. And, speaking of Adventures in Odyssey, how did you end up becoming a part of that show?
By force.
By force.
I was I got saved and was really committed to giving my life to the Lord, and I was working on some shows at a time when a gentleman, probably from Texas too, wrote a book that caused quite a stir in the church and claiming that most cartoons were demonic and nobody should be watching them, and at the same time I was working on a show called Dungeons and Dragons, which was like one of his big targets, besides the Smurfs, that were all demonic and polluting everybody's family with. And I felt so terrible, like, oh, am I involved in something that's, should I quit? Is this cartoon world a bad place to be in? I sure like my paycheck, but I don't, I want to do what's right. And just, praying about it. And one day, I wanted to be part of something that would share, good values and, bless people. And I was listening to Focus on the Family broadcast and heard a broadcast of a radio drama. And Hal Smith was in it, who also worked on Pooh Corner and Dumbo Circus. And we worked on Little Prince together. I just knew him. And some other voices that I knew were professional actors. And I thought, wow, Focus is using real actors. And that day I heard it, I happened to be in the same city as Focus on the Family, which is not near where I lived. And I went to a phone booth, which existed back then with telephone books. And I looked up their address and I drove over there and I gave them my demo reel. And I said, I would really like to work with you guys if you're using voice actors here. And I started doing a few little things with them, and I worked on one of their family portraits, and then they were like getting their idea together of Adventures in Odyssey, and I was told they were writing a part for me. They were doing this new show, and I would be a part of it, and sure enough, they did. And now we're going on 30 years, and I think it's the biggest blessing in my life, and I know that it's touched people all over the world, and I really feel like God answered my prayer.
Absolutely, Katie. That's amazing. I know it definitely blessed my family growing up. We used to listen to Odyssey each night before bed, and on road trips, we would tell our mom and dad, hey, how much longer till we're there? And they'd be like, oh, about 3 or 4 more Odysseys.
And you're not the first person to tell me that. A lot of people judge their car trips by how many Odysseys it would take to get there. And you lived in Israel,
We
right?
did. We lived in Israel for a while. My parents were doing missionary work, so...
Yeah, I remember your sister used to write to me, and so I would know what was going on with the Larkin family.
Yeah, we've all been impacted by the show and by you and your character because you've been such an integral part since the beginning.
That's right.
I don't know if you know this, Katie, but the whole reason I created Who Did That Voice is because of voice actors and voice actresses like yourself who inspired me as a kid to want to know who did that voice. So I created this show to help people realize that voiceovers are used in more than just animation.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Like with your part in Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom when you played the voice of the Maharaja.
Well, people don't realize that a lot of voices in movies are dubbed over once they get into post-production. And sometimes the actors are available, and sometimes the actors aren't available, and sometimes the actors are capable. When they're children, a lot of times they'll have an adult dub in their voice if they need to be dubbed because kids don't dub that well if they're depending on their age.
Yeah.
In this case, I know I auditioned for this part. I don't even know if I heard his voice when I auditioned. They were doing the post-production here in Los Angeles, and I was shot. Who knows where that kid was, if he was in England, if he was in India, I don't know. And I don't know why they were dubbing it. But really, I was trying to do a voice match. That's what a lot of people do, voice matches. And so they hired me to dub his voice. I honestly can't tell you why they wanted it dubbed. When I got to the studio, Spielberg was in England, so he was in a different time zone. It was just me and the engineer. I said, "So, did you get any notes? Do we know why we're doing this?" She said, "No, I don't know why." And I said, "Oh, great. Well, let's just match his voice as best we can and assume that maybe they just need a clean track." So I didn't. Sometimes they'll say, we can improve the performance and, we can have a little more freedom, to make it better. And I was pretty young back then. So nowadays, if I would have done it, I would have certainly done like exactly what he sounded like and then maybe try to change the inflection or make it make more sense. But I didn't know what the director wanted, and neither did she. So we just played it really straight and just matched his performance as best we could and sent it off to wherever it went. And that's how that happened.
Well, and it's so interesting because, even growing up as a kid, I didn't realize myself that voiceovers were used for so much more than just animation, like commercials, audiobooks, and so many other different avenues, commercials and stuff. And have you done any other works besides just movies and animation? Like, have you done commercials or audiobooks or anything like that?
Oh, my goodness, yes. I've done lots. When I started in voiceover, I did commercials, and actually some of the big paying commercials I dubbed. They had kids in them. If you go to my website, voiceofyourchildhood.com or katielee.com, you'll see an ADR reel, which means it's dubbing, looping, ADR. They're all the same name, dialogue replacement. And you can see I found now, thanks to YouTube and the magic of the interwebs, a commercial I had done in the 80s for 7-Up. And so I was able to add that to my reel where I just looped this little girl's voice. They needed it redone. Usually kids just aren't speaking clearly enough, so they want enunciation.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing an instant potato campaign for a while. My last sessions for those guys, I was actually in labor with my daughter. We had to leave.
Goodness.
We had to leave the studio to go have a baby. I had to come back to finish it about 6 weeks later, 2-3 more spots.
Oh, goodness.
And audiobooks, I've done a few audiobooks. I prefer to do children's books because my attention span is about that long. But I love to do children's audiobooks and educational things. I actually directed an audio version of a screenplay called Rex Tanner and the Sword of Damocles that I'm super proud of. It was a sort of experimental project, and I got all my excellent voiceover buddies to lend their talents to me. And you can find it on audible.com. It's not expensive, and it's super fun. And it was my first experience directing and casting, the whole project. And shout out to my husband, Vinny J., who did the sound design.
Well, speaking of books, Katie, don't you and Will Ryan have a book together?
Oh, well, Will and I recorded our book. Will Ryan and I wrote a book called Adventures in Oddity last year. Just a fun book, sort of tongue-in-cheek, disproving the notion that Will and I are anything like the characters we play on Adventures in Odyssey.
So, Katie, for anyone who's interested in your book, they just go to your website?
Yeah, well, it's all over. It is on Amazon, but you can go to my website, voiceofyourchildhood.com.
I know you were talking about the interwebs of things online, and it kind of made me think of Muppet Babies, and you played Rolf, and I know there was one episode where you actually played Spider Rolf. Do you remember that?
I know! I saw that! Somebody reposted that.
I was like, that is amazing.
That was pretty cool. Well, our director, Hank Soroyan, used to just, always jump on any current themes of the day. So, yeah, Stan Lee's in that episode.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff you guys did on that show was just fantastic. I mean, y'all would go on all kinds of adventures with Star Wars and Star Trek and just, like you said, all the current things that were of the day. The Muppet Babies would go on those adventures, and those were fantastic to see.
Yeah, it was a very creative, groundbreaking show. Because we had music. We had a song in every show.
Yeah, I love that. The musical aspect of that show was so awesome. I mean, did y'all have different writers that did the songs each time, or was it the same group or people?
Yeah, Janice Liebhardt and Alan O'Day. Alan O'Day was a pretty popular songwriter. He had some hits, and they wrote our songs. Hank Soroyan helped too, our engineer Rob Walsh. But those were the ones that mainly did the songs for us every week. And I don't know how we did that. I mean, that's... Now that I think about it, I mean, I remember recording the episodes. Was there a song in every episode? Maybe not.
Almost,
Probably.
if not every episode, almost, because you were the instigator with the piano and all.
Yeah. Well, we had enough. I don't think they were in every episode. Maybe they were. You know what? That's a good... Let's Google that, because my brain, I didn't even think about this for a long time. But we did produce 2 record albums from the show, and I remember when we went to the studio to record the songs. You know why? Because the songs were done after. We didn't do them like the same week. I think that's why we would, they'd write the shows, and there was a place for a song, and then we were, like, it's every kid's dream, right, to be in a recording studio with headphones, like, you're singing. And I remember we went down to do our first songs, and I was just so excited and blown away and afraid, because I'm really not a singer. So, it was interesting. That first session, we were, I think, at the studio till midnight or 1 o'clock, because our director was a perfectionist, and we learned that night we all could not sing together. We had to do it separately. So that was, trial and error. We all couldn't do it. And Howie Mandel and I were the 2 worst, so we got special attention. Some of the people were singers, so it was no big deal for them, but for us it was a little more of a challenge. But we did it.
That's awesome. Well, I know with my research on Muppet Babies, I realized that Barbara Billingsley was the voice of Nanny, and I was like, wow, because I remember watching Leave It to Beaver, and I knew the voice sounded familiar, but I had no recollection of her being Nanny until researching it for our interview. What was it like working with her? Did you have much interaction with her, or?
Oh, yeah. She graced us with her elegant presence every time, and she was such a lovely lady. She was married to a doctor, and just, she came to this, she was always dressed so beautifully, and I remember asking her, Barbara, why do you wear pearls to the studio? Nobody's seeing you here. Because we're like, schlumps, right? We're just like dragging in, because I don't know. We're like, voiceover actors are kind of like the nerds and geeks of the acting world.
Yeah.
I've come to realize a few Comic-Cons under my belt. And Barbara, she said, well, I dress nicely because it I don't know if she used the word bless, but maybe, it's a gift, to bless, it's nice for the people who are with me to be. And ever since she said that, then I thought, you know what? It doesn't matter where you go. It's up to us to make other people feel comfortable, and it's not all about me. She kind of opened my eyes to considering other people, and that's a confession, personal confession. So, yeah, she was great.
Katie, thank you so much for that story about Barbara Billingsley. That was really wonderful to hear. Are there any particular projects you're working on right now that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
What am I working on? Well, I do work on a show called Space Racers. Can I just say something about my daughter has a project? She started a photo essay called Humans of New York, and this is about kids with type 1 diabetes. She's just bringing people's stories, sharing them, so that kids around the world who are diabetic some of them think they're the only ones, and she's sharing their stories. So I'm really proud of her. It's justmytype1.com. And then, of course, I've just joined the staff of the Global Voice Acting Academy, and I'll be teaching classes. So you can go to my website, and there's a link. I'm on staff there for coaching, and I do some private coaching.
Oh, that's excellent to know that you do private coaching as well. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure and honor. I hope to have you back on the show again soon. Would you please do us the honor of closing us out today on Who Did That Voice?
Close you out?
Just surprise us.
So thanks for listening to Who Did That Voice? I'm Katie Leigh. I play Connie Kendall on Adventures in Odyssey. I play Honker Muddlefoot on Darkwing Duck. I was Sunny Gummy and the Gummy Bears. And I was Dumbo on Dumbo Circus. Well, that's our show for today, boys and girls. I hope you liked it.
Thank you so much for that wonderful closeout today, Katie. You have a wonderful day.
Okay, talk to you later.
Bye-bye, Katie. We'll see you next time on Who Did That Voice?
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for this episode. Thanks for joining us on Who Did That Voice for Episode 1. Don't forget, Episode 2 will be right after this. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, please stop on by my Contact Me page at whodidthatvoice.co. I'd love to hear from you, or if you have a comment, feedback, or suggestion, I'd love to hear those too. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Who Did That Voice?
Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time for more discoveries on Who Did That Voice?